The rain had only just begun when the painting arrived, wrapped in velvet, steeped in silence, and hiding more than colour beneath its surface. A missing woman, a haunted signature, and a portrait too perfect to be innocent. In the world of fine art, every brushstroke tells a story. But this one whispered, murder. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you right now. Let me know in the comments. Settle in, because this mystery begins now. When Fritz orders mineral water, it isn't a request, it's a declaration from the mountaintop. On this particular Thursday, his latest culinary sacrament demanded a brand of Silesian sparkling water that apparently could only be found in one out-of-the-way gourmet shop in the East 70s. Why he needed it for consommé was beyond me. But if it meant peace in the kitchen and food on the table, I tucked my coat tighter and marched into the sleet. I had just exited Lexington Avenue with a bottle wrapped like it was made of nitroglycerin when it happened. She wasn't running, but she moved like she might. Tall, mid-30s, high cheekbones set in pale urgency, with a navy wool coat that had seen too much winter and too little affection. She wasn't looking at anyone, until she looked at me. She grabbed my arm like it was the only steady thing in a world that had started shaking. "Tell him," she whispered, eyes darting. "Tell him the portrait knows." Then, just as fast, she let go, stumbled back a step, hailed a cab with a kind of desperation usually reserved for drowning, and vanished into traffic. I stood there for a moment, feeling like I'd just been handed a live grenade with a note saying, "Don't pull the pin." I looked down at the bottle still in my other hand, unbroken, thank you, and then glanced around. Nobody else seemed to notice. Nobody ever does, right before things go sour. I tucked the incident away in that little mental drawer labelled Pending Doom and turned west. Fritz still needed his fizz, and Wolfe would need a reason not to yell. I had both. I just didn't know which would explode first. By the time I made it halfway down Park, the air had that humming tension I usually get when something's about to crawl out from under a rock. Maybe it was her voice, or the way she clung to that phrase like it had teeth. The portrait knows. What kind of line was that? It wasn't the usual crackpot ramble. There was too much fear behind it. The real kind. The kind that makes you forget to check traffic when you're flagging a cab like your soul depends on it. And she'd said him. Not just tell someone, or tell the police, but tell him. There was only one him in my world who merited capital letters and who might make someone ditch secrecy for desperation. I was halfway to the orchid shop to pick up Wolfe's freshly imported manillas when I stopped cold. The orchids could wait. Wolfe couldn't care less if his manillas arrived one day late or 10, unless they were served on a plate or drenched in butter. But a woman in a panic dropping riddles about a portrait. That smelled like something even he wouldn't ignore, especially if it tied to murder, scandal, or worse, publicity. I turned home, and fast. By the time I made it back to the brownstone, the sleet had downgraded to an annoying drizzle, and my coat felt like it had absorbed enough water to irrigate a small vineyard. Fritz met me at the front door with that particular expression he reserves for moments when I'm late, wet, and empty-handed. "You are 23 minutes overdue," he said, peering at me like I'd failed to protect the integrity of France. "Where is the mineral water?" I handed over the bottle, still intact and barely chilled from its brush with urban mayhem. "Don't panic, Fritz. The sacred fizz lives." He sniffed. "If you had come directly—" "I was waylaid," I said, brushing past him and into the hall. "By a woman." Fritz blinked. "A woman? A frantic, mysterious, whispering one. You'd have hated it." But any further details had to wait. Wolfe's voice boomed from the office. "Archie!" I entered to find him behind his desk, scowling at a stack of unread correspondence, as if the mail had personally offended him. "You were to return within the hour," he said without looking up. "I got stopped. There was a situation." He sniffed. "There always is, when you are dispatched for groceries. True, I said. But this time, the situation came with a line I think you'll appreciate. Tell him the portrait knows. Wolfe looked up. His eyes narrowed. Then Fritz, still standing near the door, went very still. Did she say portrait? He asked. Word for word. Fritz's face, usually the image of European composure, drained a shade paler. I think, he said quietly, I once heard that phrase in a house I should never have entered. And just like that, the room got colder than the sidewalk. It was just past 8 when Fritz came into the office with that particular tightness around the mouth that he usually reserves for soufflés that fall or pork shoulders that won't. There is a woman in the vestibule, he announced, setting down a tray with Wolfe's coffee and a single glass of elderberry water for himself. She insists she is not leaving until she speaks with Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe sighed without looking up. Have her escorted out, politely. That door is not a turnstile. She says her name is Camilla Varden. That got his attention. His eyes narrowed. Mine, too. Show her in, Wolfe said. Now, I'm not unfamiliar with a well-dressed woman arriving at our brownstone with desperation tucked inside her handbag, but Camilla Varden gave the impression she'd been raised to own handbags, and the houses that made them. She walked in with composure clinging to her like perfume, even if her hands trembled the tiniest bit when she removed her gloves. Her hair was pulled tight in a dark chignon, and her eyes had the kind of distance that doesn't come from money, but from memory. I apologize for arriving unannounced, she began. But this isn't a matter for appointments. Wolfe made a sound that suggested all matters were. I need your help locating a painting, a very specific painting. A theft? Wolfe asked dryly. No, not stolen, hidden or buried, possibly destroyed. It's a portrait painted by my grandfather, a portrait that was never meant to be seen. They call it the secret portrait. Wolfe shifted his weight in his chair, just slightly. They? Camilla nodded. The family, or what's left of it. That painting could ruin them, or save me. She didn't say what from, but I was starting to think it wouldn't be boredom. Wolfe did not appreciate theatrical tension before dinner, particularly when it involved family gossip and missing artwork. I do not recover paintings, he said, leaning back and pressing his fingertips together. I do not speculate on family feuds, and I certainly do not traffic in rumour. Camilla's expression remained gracious, though a muscle in her jaw betrayed the effort. This painting, she said calmly, could expose the reason a woman disappeared, possibly more than one. My cousin Julian says it's a myth, but he's been trying to have the gallery wing sealed for weeks. Wolfe made a noise somewhere between a grunt and a sigh. I am not a vault cracker, Miss Varden. I am a detective. If there is a body, a bullet, or a confession, I might assist. But digging through old canvases in creaky houses in search of family skeletons, no. She reached into her purse, withdrew a slim checkbook, and slid a form across his desk. I saw the number before he did. Let's just say it could have bought half of Park Avenue on a cloudy day. Wolfe didn't even blink. Miss Varden, money is a temptation, but it is not, alas, an argument. She stood, not insulted, but disappointed. I had hoped you were still a man who could tell the difference between art and evidence. She turned and left the room like a woman who knew how to handle rejection, but not defeat. Wolfe reached for his beer. I was about to reach for the check. We sat in silence a full 30 seconds after she left, the door still faintly swinging from her exit. Wolfe sipped his beer. I stared at the empty hallway. Then Fritz spoke from the archway behind us. I knew a Varden house, he said quietly, in Mamaroneck, 20 years ago. Wolfe raised a brow. You never mentioned it. There are things one does not mention, Fritz replied almost too softly. I cooked there, for a week. A private commission, autumn 1937. And? There was a portrait, always covered, never discussed, a large one, hung near the stairwell like a warning. I turned to look at him. What happened? One night, someone screamed. The next morning, the painter was gone. They said he left, but he never collected payment. He looked at Wolfe. They burned something in the garden furnace that afternoon. I thought it was food waste. But the smell. He stopped. Wolfe didn't say a word. He just leaned back, eyes shut, fingers steepled. And I, for one, had the distinct impression that the refusal had just expired, quietly, without ceremony, because Mr. Wolfe had caught a scent far more irresistible than money, the scent of something rotting behind a canvas. Once Camilla Varden was gone, and the air had cleared of the subtle perfume of family ruin, Wolfe returned to his chair like a man who had just survived a rainstorm without wrinkling his shirt. "She will not return," he said. "That is settled." I gave him a look I save for delusional friends and cab drivers who miss green lights. "Not so fast, maestro," I said, taking my place on the red chair. "You may think you slammed the door, but I'd wager she's already on her way to call someone else. And when he finds the painting and makes headlines, you'll be stuck with Fritz and me and orchids that don't clap." He scowled at me. "I am not a child to be lured by candy." "No, but you're a man who doesn't like being upstaged," I said. "This isn't just a family feud. It's a painting that might show something scandalous, possibly criminal. And if there's one thing the art world loves more than money, it's scandal." Wolfe folded his hands, watching me the way a botanist watches a weed growing between the tiles. "If this is some effort to bait my pride," he said coldly, "you are wasting both your charm and my digestion." "No bait," I said. "Just observation. She's scared. Fritz looks like he saw a ghost, and you haven't called for beer in 20 minutes. That got him, barely. He reached for the bell, but his fingers hesitated. Good. That meant he was thinking. Fritz and I had just finished breakfast the next morning, a modest affair of soft-boiled eggs, ham, and a croissant I suspected had received an indecent amount of attention from a French cookbook, when the doorbell rang. I was headed to the front hall, when Fritz stopped me with a low voice. "It is her." I didn't need clarification. Camilla Varden stood in the vestibule, this time dressed in a navy coat tailored within an inch of its life, and carrying a leather travel case that screamed old money and fresh anxiety. "I hope I'm not too early," she said. "You're right on time for Act 2, I replied. "Come in." She followed me into the office without hesitation, brushed past Wolfe's stare, and set the case neatly on the floor beside his desk. From her purse, she pulled a slim envelope sealed in red wax and a pale blue money belt, which she unzipped and laid across his desk like an accusation. Cash. Bundles. Crisp, banded, and unapologetically real. $30,000, she said. In cash, tax-free if that's relevant. Wolfe looked at the money like it had personally insulted him. "And this?" he asked, tapping the envelope. "If anything happens to me," she said, "you open it. The instructions are inside." I leaned forward, curious despite myself. "That's a bit dramatic, don't you think?" "I don't," she said, her voice tight. "Last night someone tried to get into my house. The alarm scared them off. But it won't work twice." Wolfe tapped a finger once, twice, then stopped. He didn't reach for the money, but he didn't reach for the bell either, which, in our house, meant the tide had turned. "You presume much," Wolfe said, voice clipped. "That I am mercenary, that I am motivated by fear, or that I can be manipulated by theatrics." Camilla met his glare without blinking. "No, I presume you care about truth." Wolfe stood. "I care about digestion, routine, order, and not being baited into family melodramas involving night prowlers and mysterious envelopes." I cleared my throat. "You know, there's a pretty good chance this isn't a melodrama. It might be..." "Archie." "Yes, sir." "Stop talking." I did. Camilla, mercifully, did not. "I don't want you to protect me. I want you to find the painting," she said. "Whatever it shows, whoever it shows, it will explain everything." Wolfe looked at her, then at the envelope, then at the money, and then, with deliberate finality, he sat back down and turned his chair half an inch away. That will be all, Miss Varden. The room was still as wallpaper. Then she left. And for the second time in 24 hours, I had the sinking feeling we'd just turned down something that wasn't going to go away politely. It was Fritz who spoke first. "She is the daughter," he said, "of Karl Varden." Wolfe, still half-turned in his chair, paused. And I cooked there, for 1 week, in 1937. "You mentioned this," Wolfe said. "Briefly. I didn't mention everything." Fritz folded his towel with unnecessary precision and placed it on the tray. "They called it a commission, a private dinner series for the family, no outsiders. But that house..." He hesitated, which for Fritz is like a gunshot from a mime. "There were whispers," he continued, "of a painting, enormous, hung in the main stair hall, always covered. At night someone, an older man, I believe the grandfather, would stand in front of it and talk to himself. I heard him once. He said, 'No one will dare see what I have seen.'" Wolfe straightened. "And?" "On the third day I heard shouting, violent. A man threatened another over what had been painted. I heard the words, 'She'll know,' and 'ruin us all.' Later that night, there was a storm." "And the next morning?" I asked. "One of the guests was gone," Fritz said. "They said he'd left in the night, but I found his valise still packed." "And?" Wolfe asked. Fritz's voice dropped. 3 days later he was found drowned in a quarry." He looked directly at Wolfe, "with his lips sewn shut." That stopped all breath in the room, even Wolfe's. The silence after Fritz's little bedtime story could have taught graveyards how it's done. Wolfe didn't speak right away. Instead, he poured himself a glass of beer, not one of his usual half-inch celebratory pours, but a full, frothing glass, like a man steeling himself for moral compromise. Then, finally, "If the portrait exists," he said slowly, "and if it is what she believes it is, then it is dangerous." I nodded. Agreed. "If someone is willing to kill for it..." "They are," Fritz interrupted quietly. "Then it cannot be allowed to vanish, or remain buried." Wolfe exhaled heavily. "Blast the woman." "She did bring cash," I offered helpfully. He waved that away. "Irrelevant. The money is incidental. What matters is the implication." He stood, which meant we were about to cross the Rubicon. "Call Miss Varden," he said. "Tell her I will accept the case, with conditions." "Conditions?" "She will tell me everything. She will follow instructions, and she will not, under any circumstances, touch that envelope again." I grinned. "We're in, then." Wolfe gave me a look that could pickle onions. "If the portrait is dangerous," he said, "I prefer it in my safe than on someone's conscience." He sat, and with that, Nero Wolfe, gourmand, recluse, reluctant knight-errant, had officially joined the hunt. The Varden brownstone stood on East 93rd, tucked between a dentist's office and a yoga studio with frosted windows and questionable Sanskrit. From the street, it looked like the kind of place that hosted silent dinners, family grudges, and tax-deductible charities in the drawing room. I rang once. The door opened with the slow precision of a man who had read too many Gothic novels. He didn't introduce himself, the butler. Tall, sepulchral, and mute as a mime, he opened the door wide and gestured me in with a look that suggested I wipe my shoes on the way out. I stepped inside and immediately felt it. The air was still and heavy, like it hadn't been stirred by anything younger than 60 in weeks. The foyer smelled faintly of furniture polish and regret. Then there were the portraits, lining the walls from floor to ceiling, men in cravats, women with necks too long for comfort, a few children who clearly didn't survive to adulthood, all rendered in oils that refused to fade. Their eyes tracked me with that unnerving precision that only pre-war portraiture and taxidermy manage. I've walked into murder scenes, blackmail hideouts, and one surprisingly active séance, but nothing gives you the creeps like being judged by 7 generations of people who never blink. The butler led me down a narrow corridor with crimson carpeting and gold wall sconces that had once been fashionable, about 2 empires ago. At the end of the hallway, a door opened. "Mr. Julian Varden will see you now," the butler said at last, in a voice like dried leaves. As I stepped in, I made a mental note. This house wasn't just old money, it was haunted by it. Julian Varden stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back like he was posing for a brooding profile shot in an art magazine. He turned as I entered, giving me the kind of smile that comes with degrees, cufflinks, and a drawer full of old enemies. "Mr. Goodwin," he said smoothly, "I was told you were coming, though not warned you'd be early." "I like to catch people off guard," I replied, dropping into a leather chair that looked more decorative than functional. "Keeps things honest," Julian chuckled. "Then you'll be disappointed here." He was tall, trim, and polished to the hilt. Blue tie, grey waistcoat, cologne strong enough to set off smoke detectors in 3 counties. A man who knew his angles and wanted you to know them too. I didn't waste time. "I'm looking into a painting, a family piece, possibly lost, possibly hidden." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh, let me guess. Camilla sent you." I nodded. Julian walked to the liquor cart, poured something clear and didn't offer me one. "I admire her imagination," he said, "but I assure you, there is no secret portrait, just stories, whispers, things she clings to like pearls." "Stories people die for?" He didn't flinch, just sipped. "I think you'll find this family has more secrets than paintings, and less taste than it once did." He smiled again, but this one didn't reach his eyes. I asked to see the rest of the house, and Julian, without much enthusiasm, granted permission. The butler resumed silent sentinel duties and led me through a warren of hallways that smelled of lavender, dust, and long-buried grievances. He paused at a double door on the 2nd floor and opened it with a small bow. "This is Aunt Lydia's sitting room," he murmured, then vanished like a breath in winter. Inside, it was cool, dim, and fully committed to the Gothic revival. Heavy curtains filtered the light until it resembled weak tea. Cabinets lined the walls, glass-fronted, and filled with stuffed birds, pinned beetles, and oddities that would have made Darwin raise an eyebrow. Lydia Varden was in the centre of it all, arranging a trio of taxidermied ravens on a pedestal table. She wore a black lace dress that belonged to another century, and her hair, silver and tight coiled, resembled a crown carved by candlelight. "I suppose you're here about the painting," she said without looking up. I hesitated. "Yes, ma'am." She stroked one of the ravens like it might speak. "He painted his sins, you know, in oils and turpentine, rage on canvas." "Who?" "My father." She looked at me then, eyes sharp and watery. "You dig up what's buried, Mr. Goodwin, you'll find bones." I didn't doubt it. One of the ravens tipped over. She didn't notice. I found Dr. Alden Rusk in the library, where he was pretending not to wait for me. He was mid-50s, square-jawed, wearing tweed and spectacles that added intelligence he didn't need. A medical degree was framed behind him on the bookshelf, just in case you forgot he had one. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, rising, "I gather you've spoken to Lydia." "I have. She sends her warnings." "She always does," he replied dryly. "She once told the electrician he'd be electrocuted by a family curse." "I'll keep my gloves on." He gestured to a chair and offered coffee. I declined. He poured himself a cup, sipped, and leaned in like he was about to diagnose a rash. "May I ask what your exact purpose here is?" "Information," I said, "about a painting that may or may not exist, and who may or may not be willing to kill for it." He blinked once. "So it's gone that far." "You tell me." He didn't answer. Instead, he tapped his mug and said, "Lydia is fragile, and Julian, well, Julian is Julian. You would do well not to provoke either of them unnecessarily." "Got it," I said. "No poking tigers with a stick." He smiled tightly. "Or corpses." It wasn't a threat, but it wasn't not one either. The gallery wing was on the 3rd floor, behind a locked door that looked like it hadn't been opened since Roosevelt wore pince-nez. Julian had wandered off, Lydia was busy taxidermizing her soul, and Dr. Rusk had politely suggested I not disturb anything delicate. Naturally, I aimed to disturb everything. The man who met me at the gallery entrance was built like a violin string, long, narrow, and trembling in two places. "Miles Harrow," he said, extending a hand I was afraid to shake in case it shattered. "Archie Goodwin," I replied. "Nero Wolfe's assistant." He blinked twice and then said, "Oh, God." I get that reaction more often than I should. Miles was the in-house restorer, brought in 6 months earlier to catalogue and stabilise the Varden collection. Judging by the sweat beading his forehead and the coffee tremor in his hand, the paintings weren't the only things in need of stabilising. "It's been happening at night," he said, unlocking the door. "I lock this every evening, and in the morning, sometimes, it's ajar, and things have shifted." We stepped into the gallery. It was a long hall of canvas ancestors, some noble, some deranged. Paintings hung in deliberate order, until you looked closer. A corner was crooked. A dust outline showed a frame recently moved. "You think someone's searching for something," I said. He nodded. "Or hiding it again." Then he took me to the far wall and pointed at a warped panel. Near its base, a broken latch and a faint, dusty footprint in the shape of a boot. Small, feminine. We both stared at it. It stared back. I was halfway down the grand staircase, mulling over footprints and paint layers, when the front door opened hard enough to rattle the Varden ancestors off their hooks, and in came Inspector Kramer. I recognized that walk. Shoulders like a linebacker, jaw clenched like he'd chewed through a railroad spike on the way in. "Where's Wolfe?" he barked, to no one in particular. "He's home," I said from the landing. "Where he belongs. I'm the field branch." Kramer scowled. "Then congratulations, Goodwin. You just inherited a corpse." That got my attention. "Who?" "Camilla Varden's driver. Found at 6 a.m. on River Drive. Car smashed to scrap metal against a divider. At first glance, looked like he dozed off at the wheel." "At second glance?" Kramer's lip curled. "Autopsy says he was stabbed in the ribs before the crash. Left side. Blade went deep." I whistled. So much for sleepy drivers. He looked up at me, all bulldog fury and coffee breath. "You know this guy. He dropped Camilla off at the brownstone. Same night, she got spooked." "Spooked?" I gave him the abbreviated version. The envelope, the check, the missing portrait. Kramer took it in without blinking. "You think this has to do with the painting?" "I think someone wanted him silenced, and not because he ran a red light." He grunted. "Where's the painting now?" "Good question. You find it. Maybe we can ask it who killed him." He didn't smile. Neither did I. After Kramer stomped off to bully the butler for a statement, I found myself alone in the Varden drawing room, standing beneath a chandelier that probably predated income tax. The shadows in the room were long and quiet, but my mind wasn't. The woman, the one who grabbed me on the street. Tell him the portrait knows. At the time, I thought she was just a well-dressed lunatic, maybe even a plant. But now, the driver was dead, Camilla was missing, and someone had broken into a gallery looking for a piece of canvas that had a reputation more ominous than a bad will. I sat on a settee and stared at the walls. Every painting in this house looked like it was hiding something. I didn't like being watched, especially by brushstrokes. A sound echoed from the far wall, a faint scuff. Then silence, just a house settling, or someone listening. I got up slowly. If the woman in the coat had been trying to deliver a warning, maybe she hadn't failed. Maybe she'd just been too late. The fireplace had been cold for a week, judging by the dust. But something about it tugged at my curiosity. The Varden family probably burned love letters in it for fun. I knelt beside the grate and poked through the ashes with the end of a brass poker. Most of it was harmless, charred, paper, half-burned birch, and one perfect scrap of linen canvas, torn, singed at the edges and oil-painted in ochre and grey. Someone had tried to destroy it. They'd failed. Then I looked up. Just above the mantel, a frame hung empty. Its hook, the one holding the wire, was stained dark. I touched it with a tissue, dried blood. I froze. There was a shift, a scrape of movement behind me. Too soft for shoes, too heavy for wind. I turned fast. But the room was empty. The air, however, no longer felt alone. You know it's going to be a bad day when the mailman looks nervous delivering your envelope. It was just past 10 when Fritz brought it in, pinched between two fingers like it might detonate if jostled. The envelope was heavy, cream-coloured, and unmarked except for one thing, Nero Wolfe's name, written in bold black ink and underlined twice. A man in a courier's uniform left it, Fritz reported. He said it was from Miss Varden, no return address. Wolfe looked up from his orchids, frowned at the intrusion, and motioned for me to open it. He never touches mail unless it comes with a pedigree. Inside were two items. The first was a Polaroid photograph. It showed a covered painting, an old canvas draped in red velvet hung on a white wall. The corner of the cloth had slipped just enough to reveal an edge of exposed frame. It looked antique, baroque, and ominous. The second was a handwritten note, brief and sharp. He knows I saw it. Tell Archie, do not trust Julian. CV. That was it. No greeting, no explanation. I read it twice. Wolfe read it once. Fritz, he said, telephone the Varden residence. 10 minutes later, we got the answer. Camilla Varden hadn't been seen since last night. She had left her home without driver or escort. Her bedroom was untouched. Her suitcase still stood near the front door. She was gone. Just gone. Wolfe didn't speak. He didn't need to. Whatever this portrait was, it wasn't just dangerous anymore. It was lethal. The Varden house looked more haunted than usual when I arrived. Less like a mansion and more like a mausoleum with curtains. The door opened before I rang. A uniformed officer I didn't know gave me a sideways look and stepped aside. Kramer was already inside, of course. I found him in the basement hallway near the wine cellar, arms crossed, jaw clenched, and a cigar that wasn't lit, but had certainly been chewed within an inch of its life. Goodwin, he grunted. You know you've got a talent for showing up where something stinks. Only when you're already there, Inspector. He didn't rise to the bait, which meant things were bad. The cellar floor was stone cold and dry, except where the blood had pooled. Miles Harrow lay face down next to a broken wine crate, his head twisted at an angle that didn't leave room for hope. Nearby, half a marble bust lay shattered, its classical Roman nose now nothing but powder. Blunt force trauma, Kramer said. Somebody used the decor as a murder weapon, real civilized. I squatted down, glanced around. The place reeked of sharp panic, not just blood and fear, but hurry, desperation. Where's the other half of the bust? I asked. Kramer pointed to a side table near the furnace. It sat there like it had been arranged for display, cleaned of dust and blood. Too clean. I ran a finger along the marble. No grime, no smudges, no accident. Someone washed this, I said. Recently, Kramer agreed. And not with love and care. I stood up and dusted my hands. So far, we had one heiress missing, one driver stabbed, and one art restorer turned into a cellar exhibit. If this painting had secrets, someone was silencing everyone who'd seen them. I found Lydia Varden upstairs, standing in the hallway outside her parlour like she'd been waiting for me. Her dress was midnight black again, same as before, but today she wore a small silver pendant. A bird carved in ivory, wings outstretched like it had been startled mid-flight. I suppose you've heard, she said softly. I have. Her gaze didn't waver. Miles was a fool. He poked too hard, like the rest of them. You think someone killed him for curiosity? No, she replied. I think the painting did. I didn't flinch. I've heard weirder, but not much. She leaned in slightly, voice dropping. There are things that don't belong on canvas, Mr. Goodwin. Secrets too foul for varnish. My father painted them anyway. He said truth needed a face, but not all truths deserve to be seen. And the portrait? Her lips barely moved. It curses those who look, every one of them. Then she turned and disappeared into her den of birds and shadows. I stood there for a long second, trying to decide if she was mad or right. Back at the brownstone, things were off. Fritz's veal roast with black truffle sauce sat untouched on the warming tray. The lunch bell hadn't rung. The dining room was dark. And Nero Wolfe, who once delayed a police interview because his omelette had reached an irrevocable stage of softness, hadn't moved from his chair in the office since I got back. You'd think a murder, a missing heiress, and a haunted painting would have distracted him. It hadn't. Not until now. He hadn't even poured himself beer. I want Saul, he said. I picked up the phone and dialed. And Fred? Yes, both. When Saul Panzer and Fred Durkin walked in 15 minutes later, Wolfe didn't waste a second. No greetings, no pleasantries, no orchid updates. We are engaged, Wolfe announced, in an investigation wherein death, deception, and artistic delusion intersect. You will both proceed with urgency. Fred nodded, looking grave. Saul just crossed his arms and waited for specifics. Wolfe continued. Mr. Durkin, Julian Varden, you will observe him day and night. He is either protecting the painting or attempting to sell it. To whom? Fred asked. That, Wolfe replied, is Mr. Panzer's charge. He turned to Saul. There is a secondary market for art. Whispers, shadows, back channels. Start in New York, end wherever needed. And the subject? Saul asked. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. A missing Varden portrait, rumoured, dangerous, worth dying for. Saul raised an eyebrow. Understood. And just like that, lunch was off. War was on. Fred left first, his usual rumpled coat slung over one arm and a notebook already half full. He wasn't flashy, but if Julian Varden so much as sneezed into a monogrammed handkerchief, Fred would know which dry cleaner handled it. Wolfe had only paused to instruct him to avoid contact unless absolutely necessary. I want the man watched, not ruffled. Fred nodded like he'd heard it 100 times. He had. Saul lingered. Wolfe, tapping his fingertips, spoke with crisp finality. You'll start with Ravenwood Auctions. They've handled Varden works before, legitimate and otherwise. From there, work outward. Ask no direct questions. Follow the scent. Discreetly, Saul said. As if your life depended on it, Wolfe said. I offered Saul a grin. You'll know you're on the right trail if someone tries to stab you with a paintbrush. He didn't smile, which was fair. Wolfe turned his eyes to me next. You, Archie, will cross-reference private collectors with known interest in controversial portraiture. Start with the ones who don't list their collections in glossy magazines. And if I find one, verify their appetite for secrets. As Saul headed out, Wolfe called after him. One more thing. If a sale is imminent, find the buyer. Why? Because, Wolfe said, standing now, a rare thing before dinner. We are working against a clock. He walked to the window, folded his hands behind his back, and stared into the city like it might blink first. If that painting leaves the country, he muttered, we may never find Camilla Varden again. It was just after 6 when Saul Panzer returned, his hat in his hand and something sharp behind his eyes. Wolfe had just finished rearranging his orchids. Fritz had threatened mutiny over the twice-abandoned trout amandine, and I was on my second cup of coffee, hoping for answers more than caffeine. Saul didn't waste time. Prague, he said. A man named Emil Kovac, disgraced gallery owner, now a broker in the black market scene. He's been whispering about a lost Varden original. Details, Wolfe demanded. 3 days ago, he offered a private buyer in Zurich a portrait he claimed should never have existed. Did he name a price? I asked. Saul nodded. $2 million. US dollars. Unframed, rolled, no provenance. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Description? Anonymous female subject, choked, expression distorted. I felt my gut twist. And he offered no photograph? Wolfe asked. Too dangerous, he said, but he described it like he'd seen it with his own eyes. Wolfe sat back hard. That portrait is not myth, he said. It exists, and it is about to be erased. He reached for a pad and began scribbling rapidly. Names, numbers, countries. Then he stopped, leaned back, and said with cold precision, "We now have less than 72 hours to prevent a murder of truth." And when Wolfe used that voice, the one that could chill butter at 20 paces, even I knew someone, somewhere, was running out of time. If there's one thing I hate more than killers, it's cold storage units. And as fate would have it, I found myself tracking both on a Monday morning with sleet in the forecast and no backup, but a trench coat and Wolfe's disapproval-riding shotgun in my brain. The lead came from a storage receipt tucked inside Camilla's personal files, which Saul had retrieved from the Varden house while Kramer was distracted yelling at a potted plant. The unit was on West 47th, leased under an alias that screamed upper-class guilt on the run. Wolfe said, "Check it out." So I did. It was one of those high-end art preservation bunkers with steel walls, biometric locks, and more humidity controls than a cigar vault. The desk clerk gave me a name, Miss Eloise Hartman, and a key card, no questions asked. Unit 23D was in the lower level. It looked like every other reinforced freezer box on the corridor. I swiped the card, stepped inside, and immediately regretted not bringing a coat made of something thicker than sarcasm. It was freezing, literally. I breathed out a fog. Inside were 2 wooden crates, a metal rack, and an empty easel. No portrait. I turned to step out and heard the click. The door had shut. No problem. I reached for the handle. No dice. I tried the card. The reader was dead. Then the lights dimmed. The hum of the compressor deepened. I was locked in, and someone had flipped the temperature from Chile to Siberia with attitude. Minutes passed. I tried kicking, yelling, pounding on the steel. Nothing. My fingers went numb, then my toes. Breath came in sharp gasps. Frost crept across the door. Just as my vision blurred, I saw it. A shape. A shadow moving across the outer glass. Someone was watching, and then they were gone. It took a full 40 minutes and a panicked UPS guy to get me out. He'd come down the wrong hallway with a delivery of archival foam and heard what he described later as a series of very angry thuds and something that sounded like a man cursing his ancestors. He wasn't wrong. By the time I got back to the brownstone, my face was half frozen, my suit was soaked, and I'd added a new item to my growing list of near-death experiences that Nero Wolfe owed me hazard pay for. I burst into the office and slammed the door. "I nearly died," I snapped. Wolfe didn't look up from his orchid journal. "I surmise from your colour and vocal tone that you did not." "I was locked in a freezer, Wolfe." He glanced up. "Did it contain the painting?" "No," I barked, "but it nearly contained me." Wolfe sighed. "Archie, do you know what happens when an orchid is exposed to sudden frost? I know what happens to me. It dies," he said flatly. "So let us agree that the painting remains at large, and the orchid, and you, are narrowly spared. Now sit." He wasn't shaken, but he was worried. I could tell. Fred called just as I was wringing the last bit of circulation back into my fingers. His voice was low, clipped, and short on adjectives. That meant he had something. "I've got him. He's not at home. Julian. Yeah, he met a guy. Midtown Cafe. Grimy joint called Cafe Belco." Grimy? Think unwashed spoons and conspiracy theories. I relayed this to Wolfe, who perked up just enough to shift his bulk in the chair. Description of the man? Trench coat, grey hat, Slavic accent. Looked like trouble dipped in varnish. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Fred continued. They talked for about 20 minutes, passed an envelope. Man left first. Julian stayed for pie. Follow the man, Wolfe ordered. Fred grunted. Already am. We hung up, and Wolfe stood. A rare occurrence, like a lunar eclipse or a day without Fritz fussing about scallions. He crossed to the bookshelf, extracted a thick black volume, and opened it to a bookmarked page. Emil Kovac, he said. A dealer, once reputable, now exiled. Specializes in post-war acquisitions of dubious origin. Often moves pieces stolen during the war. Reputed to have connections in Prague, Vienna, and Buenos Aires. Is he in the art world or the crime world? I asked. In the Venn diagram, Wolfe said. He is the overlapping part. I let out a low whistle. If Julian was selling to Kovac, the painting wasn't just family baggage anymore. It was evidence, and international. Wolfe remained standing, which meant we were still in intellectual overdrive. He began pacing, 3 steps left, 3 steps right, then turned to face me. Archie, consider this. The painting does not depict mere scandal. It is not an affair or a vanity portrait. It is something worse. Define worse, I said. Because lately, that category's been expanding. He ignored me. Suppose the subject is not a mistress or rival, but a victim. A real one. A woman connected to wartime events. A refugee. A betrayal captured in oils. I blinked. You think the painting's a confession? He tapped a finger. Or a witness. Julian's uncle may have seen something, a murder, a crime, and painted it, as memorial or leverage. But why kill Camilla? Or Miles? Wolfe paused. Camilla may have seen the painting. So did Miles. Their deaths may be attempts at erasure. Or, I said slowly, maybe Camilla wasn't a threat to the killer. Wolfe arched a brow. Maybe she was the intended subject. That gave him pause. She's Varden blood, I added. If the painting's personal, maybe it's about her. Something she doesn't know, or just found out. Wolfe sank back into his chair, steepled his fingers and murmured. Either way, the portrait holds the key. We must see it, before someone decides to destroy the evidence once and for all. The fog rolled in just after sunset, one of those heavy, wet blankets that makes the street lamps look like they're sweating secrets. I was in the front room, cataloguing inconsistencies in Julian Varden's timeline, when the phone rang. It was Saul. She's gone, he said. I didn't have to ask who. By the time I got to the Varden townhouse, the place was in quiet panic. Lydia's room was on the 2nd floor, tucked away in a corner that had once been a nursery. The window was open. The curtains fluttered in the breeze like pale arms reaching for help too late. There was blood. Not a lot, but enough to say it wasn't just a late-night stroll that went sideways. Dry streaks ran down the sill. Fritz could have told you the approximate hour based on the oxidation pattern, but Fritz wasn't there, and I didn't want to call him. Mrs. Dowling, the housekeeper, stood in the doorway wringing her apron. She was up here alone, reading. She said she had a headache. Then she was gone. I scanned the room. Books, empty teacup, a half-sewn felt owl on the dresser, and on the floor, just beneath the bed frame, something out of place. A single black feather. Lydia's taxidermy collection was sealed in cases on the opposite wall. This one had been placed deliberately. A calling card. I picked it up and turned to Saul. We just got promoted, I said grimly. This isn't family drama anymore. He nodded. It's a hunt. I don't enjoy cellars. They're always too damp, too dark, and too full of metaphors. But when Wolfe told me to dig again, I dug. That's what you get for having legs in a partnership where the other guy has a throne and orchids. The Varden cellar had already been searched twice, once by Kramer's crew and once by Saul. But neither of them had my gift for spotting what doesn't quite belong, like me at a poetry reading. I started with the wine racks. Most were half-stocked, dusty, and properly labelled. Then I saw a gap behind the crate marked Haut-Briand, 1947. Now, I know exactly two things about wine: that Fritz considers anything under $60 an insult, and that when rich people hide things, they usually do it somewhere they think only they can reach. I shifted the crate. A spider skittered out like it had dinner plans. And there, wedged behind the old French oak slats, was a charred leather-bound journal. Its edges were singed. Some pages had melted together. I opened it carefully. No name, no date, just ink blots and cryptic entries that read like a playwright's nervous breakdown. He painted her shame. The mirror's reflection lies. No forgiveness under varnish. Lydia must never know. Each line made my skin itch. This wasn't diary stuff. It was guilt, coded and burning through the paper like acid. I snapped a few photos, then tucked the journal into my coat and headed up the stairs. Wolfe needed to see this, because whoever wrote it wasn't just afraid. They were trying to confess, and someone had nearly succeeded in erasing it. When I stepped into the office with the journal, Wolfe was already in position. Seated beneath the glowing canopy of his orchids, sipping his beer like civilization depended on his digestion. He didn't look up. "Tell me." So I did. Every word, every feather, every cryptic whisper scratched into that scorched book. When I finished, Wolfe closed his eyes and steepled his fingers. "It is enough," he murmured. "More than enough." "For what?" I asked. "To tighten the circle." I waited while he indulged in a 10-second silence that reeked of superiority. "Mr. Goodwin," he said at last, "the events have now cohered into a shape. A vile one, but discernible. The portrait is not merely valuable, it is proof. The painter, the keeper, the killers, all orbit it like satellites around guilt. So what's next? We invite them to see themselves, as they are." His voice sharpened. "You will summon the principals, Julian Varden, Mrs. Dowling. Saul will retrieve Kovac if necessary. And Lydia, she's missing." He opened his eyes. "She will reappear, if the pressure is applied correctly." He stood. Stood, mind you, which meant things were reaching volcanic temperatures. "I will no longer pursue the painting," he said. "I will let it pursue them." "And what exactly are we about to paint, boss?" I asked. Wolfe's mouth curved, just barely. "A portrait," he said, "of guilt." And I believed him, because Wolfe didn't bluff. He cornered, and now the corners were closing in. If Nero Wolfe ever ran a theatre company, the seating chart alone would kill the critics, and the actors wouldn't survive the intermission. At exactly 4 o'clock, the brownstone office became a stage. Wolfe was in his throne behind the desk. Fritz had scrubbed and polished the place so thoroughly you could have performed surgery on the globe stand. I opened the windows for dramatic effect. Not that Wolfe approved of fresh air, but the moment called for it. Julian Varden took the red chair. He looked like a man about to make a toast at his own hanging. Dr. Rusk, morose as a funeral sermon, was tucked in the corner like an unwanted subplot. Lydia, pale, eyes glassy, was perched beneath the orchids. She hadn't spoken since Saul found her at the ferry terminal with a packed satchel and a blank stare. Wolfe tapped his fingertips together. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "you will remain alert. These proceedings, while theatrical, are not without danger." "I'm as alert as a man gets without a raise," I replied. And I locked the front door. That should cut down on any spontaneous exits. Good. The room thickened. Fritz entered briefly to serve coffee and retreated like a well-trained ghost. No one touched the cups. Julian broke the silence. "This is a circus." "Indeed," Wolfe replied. "And yet you arrived without protest." "You threatened my lawyer." "I persuaded him, accurately." He glanced at Lydia. "Miss Varden, you are safe here." She nodded, barely. Wolfe leaned forward. "Now that we are all present, the curtain may rise." And just like that, the show began. Wolfe didn't raise his voice. He never had to. The portrait exists. 4 syllables, calm as morning tea, but they struck like a firecracker in a porcelain museum. Julian blinked. Rusk shifted in his seat. Lydia drew in a breath so shallow it barely rippled her blouse. "Excuse me," Julian said, half smirk, half scoff. Wolfe nodded once. The secret portrait, painted in oils, preserved, hidden, and now recovered. I leaned against the bookshelf and watched their faces. Julian's smirk was a little too polished, like it had been rehearsed. Rusk stared at the carpet like it owed him money. Lydia bit her lip. Wolfe continued. "It is unsigned. The canvas aged. The brushwork consistent with a particular hand. One Mr. Julian Varden knows intimately." Julian snorted. "You've been sniffing varnish." "That would be your department," Wolfe said crisply. "The painting contains more than technique. It holds an image no one was ever meant to see." Julian crossed his legs. "So now you're an art critic?" "No, merely an observer of truth rendered in pigment." He paused for dramatic seasoning. "The truth," he said, "is a persistent beast. It scratches from beneath doors. It echoes behind brushstrokes. And it remains unchanged, even when buried." I liked that line. Would have put it on a t-shirt if I thought Wolfe would let me expense it. Wolfe looked toward Lydia. "Miss Varden, you've seen it, haven't you?" She flinched, just slightly. Julian leaned forward, and his voice dropped a degree. "What the hell are you playing at?" Wolfe smiled. "A simple unveiling," he said. "The painting," Wolfe said, "depicts a room not unlike this one. A woman, young, blonde, hands around her throat." Julian laughed, loud and hollow. "You've gone mad. It is fortunate, then, that I am not the one on trial." His voice cut through the room like a scalpel. "She is wearing an emerald brooch, unique, the same one worn by your former fiancée, Anya Kovacs." The name hit like a gut punch. Rusk looked up sharply. Lydia froze. Julian's face didn't move, except for a single bead of sweat, which took a suicidal dive from his temple. "You're digging up ghosts, Wolfe." "Indeed. She vanished 10 years ago. No body, no note. You claimed she left you." "I said she ran." "Yes," Wolfe murmured. "And painters paint what they know. Your uncle painted her, not alive, not fleeing, but dying, by your hand." Julian stood abruptly. "You've got no proof. Just a dusty canvas and a sick imagination." Wolfe didn't blink. "The brushstrokes match his known works. The cellar blueprint confirms the canvas was hidden behind bricked wine racks, precisely where he lived out his last years. And the journal," I held it up, "confirms he saw what you did." Julian's hands clenched. "This is insane." "It is inconvenient," Wolfe corrected. "There is a difference." Rusk whispered, "My God." Lydia whispered nothing at all. Julian turned to me, eyes hard. "You think this is real?" I gave him my best professional shrug. "I'm just the guy who finds the stairs. He's the one who pushes people off them." He didn't smile. "But that sweat." It kept coming. Wolfe allowed the silence to marinate. Then he spoke, slow and precise, as if dictating a menu of sins. "Your uncle, August Varden, was a man of strange talent. He painted sorrow, not scenery, emotion, not architecture, and in his final years he painted truth." Julian didn't sit. He paced, 3 steps, pivot, 3 steps back. Wolfe watched him like a botanist inspecting a toxic bloom. "He saw what you did to Anya, whether you knew or not. Perhaps you thought the house empty. Perhaps you forgot he rarely left that cellar studio. But he witnessed it." Wolfe glanced at the journal on my lap. "He wrote cryptically, but he painted clearly. That was his confession, a canvas of justice." Julian stopped pacing. "You can't prove he saw anything," Wolfe arched a brow. "He never sold or displayed the piece. He built walls around it, and then he drank himself into a final silence. That is proof enough for me." And the law? Julian asked. That, Wolfe said, is for Inspector Kramer, who should be arriving, yes, about now. The front door slammed. Boots thundered up the hall. Archie, Wolfe murmured, if you would be so kind as to open the door for our guest. He has a fondness for dramatic timing. I moved, and behind me, Julian Varden finally ran out of clever lines. Kramer stood just inside the doorway, jaw tight, hat still on. I gave him a nod that said, "You're going to like this next bit," and he grunted in reply. Wolfe, utterly unbothered by the arrival of New York's most constitutionally irritable inspector, continued with the rhythm of a man delivering a eulogy no one asked for, but everyone needed. There is a line of consequence, Wolfe said. It begins with the painting and ends in 3 bodies. Julian had returned to the red chair, though now he resembled less a gentleman and more a man calculating window heights. Camilla Warren, Wolfe intoned. She found the painting, or rather stumbled upon it. You entrusted her with your wine collection, but forgot your uncle's secrets were stored beside your Pinot Noir. Julian said nothing. Her death, staged as a fall, was neither accidental nor elegant. You silenced her. Lydia gasped, sharp and sudden. The sound echoed louder than Wolfe's voice. She told her driver, Wolfe said, a young man with a fondness for jazz and talking too much. He mentioned it at a bar. A man overheard. Rusk muttered, Miles. Wolfe nodded. Miles edgily traced the rumour. His art background made him suspicious. He visited you, Mr. Varden. He saw enough to know, and so he too died. Lydia's hands trembled. Her complexion drained to something between ivory and paper. She looked like a woman remembering the scent of blood too late. I took a step forward, just in case. But Julian didn't move. 3 people, Wolfe said, all murdered to protect a portrait of murder. Julian muttered, I should have burned it. That, Wolfe said, would have been wiser. Wolfe turned his gaze. Not sharp, not cruel, just heavy. Miss Varden, he said. She met his eyes with the expression of someone expecting thunder and perhaps hoping for it. You discovered the painting last week. You knew what it meant. She swallowed. I didn't know it was real. I thought it was symbolic. No, Wolfe replied. You hoped it was symbolic, but in your heart, you knew. Her voice cracked. He's my brother. That is neither here nor there. You knew, and you tried to bury it. Tears welled, but she kept her chin lifted. I wanted to protect what was left of our name. Family shame, Wolfe said, is not an acceptable currency for silence. He paused, just long enough to let her breathe. But nor is it criminal. That startled her. I have informed Inspector Kramer of your part, Wolfe said. You concealed evidence, but the context, emotional and moral, will be weighed. Kramer growled. It better be a light scale. Lydia nodded, broken but composed. I looked at her then and saw not a conspirator, but a woman caught between duty and horror. Some prisons, after all, don't need bars. And now, Wolfe said, the clincher. Julian rolled his eyes, which might have passed for confidence if his left hand hadn't begun twitching like a guilty conscience. Wolfe gestured to me, and I brought the envelope from the safe. This, I said, is from Saul Panzer, taken Tuesday night at 11:17 p.m. I opened the flap and pulled out the photograph. A single image, blurred slightly from distance but unmistakable. Julian Varden, flashlight in mouth, reaching into the false panel behind a row of cellar shelving. In his hands, a rolled canvas. Julian didn't speak. He didn't blink. Rusk leaned forward. My God! Wolfe's voice was silk on steel. You returned to the house under cover of night to retrieve your uncle's final betrayal, likely with the intent to destroy it. Julian stared at the photo. His pupils dilated. His breath shortened. You were followed by Mr. Panzer, Wolfe continued. He had been watching since the death of Mr. Edgerly. He suspected you would return to the scene of your greatest mistake. Kramer stepped closer. Julian's jaw clenched. Wolfe laid the photo on the desk. The proof, Mr. Varden, is not only in brushstrokes, it is in action. Julian's eyes darted toward the orchid stand. Something flashed behind them, and then he lunged. Julian surged toward Wolfe like a linebacker who'd skipped the playbook and gone straight for the ref. He made it 3 steps. That's when my knee met his gut. Julian doubled, but not before Saul Panzer, silent and sudden as guilt, stepped out from behind the globe stand and swept the man's legs with a move I hadn't seen since my days refereeing amateur judo at the 23rd Street YMCA. Julian hit the carpet with a thud that rearranged my bookshelves. Kramer, already halfway across the room, barked, "On your feet, Varden, if you can manage it without assaulting anyone else." Wolfe hadn't moved, not even a twitch. He adjusted his chair, just a 1/4 inch forward, and looked down at the man, gasping like a fish on the rug. "That," Wolfe said, calm and cold, "was your second mistake." Julian groaned. "The first," Wolfe added, "was trusting no one had found the painting." Kramer waved in his boys, who clomped in with the subtlety of elephants in wingtips. They hauled Julian up and began reciting the usual litany. He didn't argue. He was past it now. Wolfe turned to Lydia, who looked like a ghost in pearls. "I suggest," he said softly, "you leave New York for a time. Grief and scandal both thrive in crowds." She nodded, not in thanks, just resignation. Fritz reappeared with a fresh tray, eyes wide. "Have they finished?" he asked. "More or less," I said. Wolfe picked up his beer, took a sip, and sighed. "Archie," he said, "see them out." I did. And when I returned, the orchids were still standing, quiet witnesses to murder, memory, and a portrait that never lied. The front door slammed open like a law book thrown on a desk. "Hold it!" came the voice I'd recognize even if I were blind and underwater. Inspector Kramer barreled in, red-faced and puffing like he'd jogged the last block through traffic, which he probably had. Behind him were 2 uniformed cops and a sergeant with a clipboard, and the posture of a man regretting his career. Kramer's eyes locked onto Julian, who was still trying to decide if standing upright was worth the trouble. "Well," Kramer barked, "what the hell's all this?" "Inspector," Wolfe said, not rising, "your timing, though characteristically noisy, is serviceable." "You let him take a swing at you?" Kramer's eyebrows headed for his hairline. "He attempted. He failed." Wolfe sipped beer like it was tea. "He will now, I presume, be arrested." "Oh, he'll be arrested," Kramer muttered. "You want a medal?" "No," Wolfe said. "Only your customary skepticism, followed by reluctant approval." I coughed. "We've already handled the heavy lifting, but if you want to pose for the statue, we'll clear the marble." Kramer shot me a glare like he wanted to punch me and ask questions later. Then he turned back to Wolfe. "All right, genius, start talking." "I already have," Wolfe said. "But since you were not here, Mr. Goodwin can recap. Briefly." Kramer rolled his shoulders and pulled out his cigar stub. "Make it good, Archie. I want to understand it before my ulcer does." The Varden townhouse on East 67th had the kind of cellar that gave sommelier dreams to grown men. Long, narrow, stone-lined, with racks that would make a vineyard weep and a damp chill that smelled like money. Fred Durkin, loyal as a basset hound and twice as thorough, had already been dispatched. Wolfe gave him the exact coordinates before Julian's wrists had cooled from the cuffs. "There," Wolfe had pointed. "Behind the northern rack, 4th row, 6th bottle. You'll find what remains." Kramer grunted. "You think there's a body?" "I suspect so," Wolfe said. "Camilla Warren did not vanish into ether." 20 minutes later, Fred called in. The words were simple, but they packed a punch. "Yeah, Archie, she's here." By the time we arrived, the cellar smelled less like wine and more like the end of a story. Camilla Warren's body had been wedged behind the racks, wrapped in burlap like a forgotten vintage. Her face was untouched, peaceful in a way that made it worse. A wine opener lay nearby, too clean to be a coincidence. Kramer cursed softly. Damn it! Damn it all! Fred, white-faced, handed me something. It was a scrap, not of clothing, not of burlap, canvas. Painted once, then scorched. One corner still bore the curve of an old signature, JV. Looks like part of the original portrait, I muttered. Kramer leaned over my shoulder. He tried to burn it. Not all of it, I said. Just the piece with the past. Wolfe, who'd remained upstairs, would not have been surprised. He already knew. It was the rest of us catching up, breathing in mildew and murder. Julian Varden didn't protest as they led him out. He didn't weep. He didn't speak. Which was fine. Wolfe had already spoken enough for both of them. I stood at the top of the brownstone steps, watching the crowd of flashing bulbs and shouting reporters. One of them tried to snag a quote from me. I gave them a smile sharp enough to cut linen. Back inside, Wolfe settled back with a sigh. Not of exhaustion, more like digestion. I suppose, I said. That's your final brushstroke. Wolfe snorted. I leave poetry to the French and Mr. Goodwin's regrettable narration. Oh, come on, I said. You of all people should appreciate the irony. Julian Varden killed for art and got framed. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Framed. Get it? Yes, he muttered. May I finish my beer in peace? Suit yourself? I turned to the orchids. Beautiful, controlled, silent. Funny thing, I added. Murder and painting both take vision, steady hands, and a reason. But the difference is, one hangs in a gallery, the other wears handcuffs. Wolfe didn't respond, which, in his case, meant approval. The phone rang in the background. Another reporter, no doubt. Fritz ignored it. The room was quiet again. Not peaceful, but resolved. Fritz's trout amandine was the kind of meal you don't describe to the hungry. The crust shimmered with buttered almonds, and the lemon glaze had a subtlety that belonged in sonnets. Wolfe attacked it with the intensity of a man restoring balance to the universe. Adequate, he said, after the second bite. Fritz beamed. That was a rave Wolfe style. Popovers followed. Warm, golden, hollow miracles that collapsed with the gentlest pressure. I took two. Outside, the papers were screaming about the gallery ghoul, the Varden curse, and blood on canvas. Wolfe didn't read any of them. I read them all. I suppose you won't be attending the trial, I said. Certainly not, Wolfe replied. The theatre bores me unless I select the cast. I chuckled. You already did. He glanced at the window. The rain had started again, thin, persistent, unbothered. I presume, he said, there will be inquiries, letters, and additional blather? Already incoming. Then I shall remain at table, pass the salt. Some cases haunt you, others hang around like smoke after a séance. This one? It painted itself into your brain, layer by layer, lie by lie. The kind of case where every brushstroke cost a life. Camilla Warren, who found beauty in order and died for it. The driver, who spoke a sentence too many. Miles Edgerly, who loved truth enough to follow it into a grave. And Julian, the man who thought genius gave him license, who killed to protect a legacy he never earned. As for Lydia, she carried the guilt like a tarnished heirloom. And Wolfe, he carried nothing, except the case and dinner in that order. The painting is gone now, destroyed, catalogued, forgotten, but not by me, because I saw what it meant. Art, after all, doesn't lie. People do. And sometimes, when those lies are brushed over in oil and pigment, it takes more than a detective to scrape them clean. It takes a man who eats trout like a king and another who knows how to find murder in the margins. As Wolfe once said, with that look of his that makes even truth feel nervous, art is life. But life, my dear Archie, rarely reciprocates. Some canvases are painted not with colour, but with guilt, silence, and memory. In the end, It wasn't the frame or the brushwork that condemned Julian. It was the secret he tried to bury, the truth too vivid to fade. Lydia chose silence over justice, but Wolfe chose neither. And as the scent of trout amandine drifted from the kitchen, a chapter closed, quietly, firmly. What do you think? Was Lydia's silence a crime of the heart or an act of mercy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed the mystery, be sure to like the video, share it with someone who loves detective stories, and subscribe for more. Not every case ends with applause, but the truth once found always echoes.